So Chris is a chartered engineer, freight and civil engineering professional. His consultancy, Bootham Network Solutions, and Colin's already expressed his concern about the word solutions and how it's overused in vocabulary these days. Provides advice and support and solutions to the rail freight industry. So Chris, over to you to give us your insight in what's changed and what as infrastructure engineers we need to be thinking about.
Okay, right. Well, thanks very much, Ben. Yeah, just to expand on that, I'm a chartered civil engineer by profession, a graduate of the British Rail Eastern Region training scheme. After that, I worked for a couple of years in the Bridge Design Office in York with Roger, or for Roger, and then went to Peterborough to the Area Civil Engineers Office, where I was Structures and Buildings Assistant, responsible, amongst other things, for maintaining King's Cross Station, which was fascinating. And then in 1991, I moved into the freight industry, various project management roles, and then commercial roles, managing commercial accounts. And I spent 8 years based in Scunthorpe, managing what was then Tata Steel account with DB Schenker. And then for the last 8 years, I've been running my own consulting business. So this evening, bit of an introduction. I gave a talk to this group in 2019, titled "Fit for Freight?" ? Is the rail network fit for freight? So the idea of this talk then is to see how things have changed since then, how the rail freight market has evolved, some recent developments in rail freight, and what progress on network capability for freight. And the thing that started me off on this idea was this picture here, which appeared in the journal, I think in 2007, and it's one of those tests, identify as many things as possible as are wrong with that photograph. And various learned PWI members and PWI engineers wrote in with great long lists of areas in which that layout did not comply with current standards. But I looked at it from the other way round. I looked at that picture and I saw, well, the rails are shiny and clean, so it's obviously being used, and being used fairly frequently and fairly regularly and recently. I can't see any obvious sign of derailment damage. The sleepers are not cut up. There's not signs of ballast having been displaced or new ballast being put down. So the conclusion I take from that photograph is actually it is doing what it is supposed to do. I don't know what it is supposed to be doing, but whatever it is doing it. And I think we as engineers, and I include myself in that, have a tendency to get too focused on the detail. We think that there's a standard, everything must conform to the standard, and if it doesn't conform to the standard, therefore it is wrong. Now, engineers are not alone in getting too focused on the detail, because I used to find this with some of my colleagues in the rail freight business, and you would say to them, but what does our company do? And they say, oh, we move freight trains, or we move coal. Well, yes, up to a point, but that doesn't really encapsulate it. And I was very pleased when I was walking over to the meeting today with Matt, and he said, I've got to buy the biscuits, because biscuits now form part of this. The point I want to make. Biscuits part of the solution. It is a solution, yes. Now, I can be very, very efficient and very effective in moving biscuits around. I mean, I could pick up the other packets and I'd be doubly efficient because I'd be moving 2 at a time. But what's the benefit of that? The only benefit is when I deliver the biscuits to Colin, and he can take them or not. But he does have the choice. And it's the same with freight. There's no point just moving it around. It's only when you deliver it somewhere and it can be used that you've added some value. So if you deliver aggregate to a concrete plant, it can be used to make concrete. If you deliver semi-frozen chilled food to a supermarket distribution centre, it can then be redistributed and taken to its customer. So you've added some value. So you've got to focus on the delivery, focus on where you're adding value, and it's the same with infrastructure. Because if I ask people in this office, perhaps, what do you do? They say, oh, well, I design bridges or I design track. Actually, what you do is you enable the construction of an infrastructure project, a transport link, and that then enables stuff to be delivered that we've talked about, or passengers to travel to access education or employment, or to travel for leisure. So in the same way, infrastructure is an enabler. It's not an end in itself. It's a means by which you achieve the end. And the end is people being able to travel, stuff being able to be delivered. So I was asked a couple of weeks ago, is there going to be engineering in this talk? Well, yes, there is. And that's probably most of it. I'm certainly not going to tell you how to do something. I'll tell you or give you some guidance as to what needs to be achieved, but you as the practicing engineers need to work out what's the best way of achieving it. Okay, so we're talking about rail freight. So a bit about how the rail freight market has evolved over the last 5 or so years. Just some key facts there. Rail market share, about 4.8% of freight lifted, i.e. that's tons. 8 or 9% of freight delivered. The ORR, going back to what I was saying about delivered, the ORR statistics talks about freight moved, which I object to on principle, but freight delivered is the same as freight moved, and that's tons by distance, so ton kilometres. Something in the order of 40% of construction deliveries in the southeast of England made by rail, so that's aggregate, cement. 40% of those ton kilometres now are consumer goods. So it's no longer the heavy industry, trainload freight commodity industry that it once used to be, dominated by coal. 1 in 4 of import and export containers delivered by rail. Bit about the size of the rail market, how it's changed. Well, it's actually decreased since 2017, 2018. The tons that have been lifted down from about 78 to 72 million tons. Why is that? Partly that's due to a change in the market. So in 2017-18, there's about 10 million tons of coal going to power stations. That's no longer travelling by rail. In fact, it's no longer required at all because there's almost no coal-fired power generation now. Strikes have had an input, and general weakness in the economy. Less biomass than was expected because we're generating more electricity now from renewable, from wind and solar, so less requirement for biomass. So freight lifted down by about, what did I say? Down by about 10%. The freight delivered only down by 7%. So the market's changing from being high tonnage, short distance to being lower tonnage, longer distance. And you can see that although the tonnage lifted has decreased, the actual train miles is more or less the same. Not a great deal of difference there. Revenue, the rail freight companies earning about £900 million in a year. And that graph, ORR figure, shows the freight lifted. I don't need to tell you what the dip at 2021 was. But the market bounced back after that, bounced back strongly, but has then weakened for the reasons I've described. Just general weakness in the economy. The coal that was being delivered to support power stations in the immediate aftermath of the Ukraine war has disappeared. So the tonnage has decreased. And if you look at the freight moved, or rather I'd say freight delivered graph, it's very similar in shape. So 72 million tons of freight a year, 15 or so billion net ton kilometers. What does that look like? Well, as I said, it's not the bulk market that it used to be, dominated by coal. The biggest commodity now is the intermodal maritime sector, with about 35% of the ton kilometres. So that is containers coming into deep sea ports, Felixstowe, Thames Gateway, Liverpool, Southampton, and then being delivered by rail to inland terminals. That now is the biggest sector of the rail freight industry, followed by construction. Construction is primarily aggregates, but also some cement, some building products, about 31%. And then the rest, much for muchness, metals about 8%, and that I think is only going to decline as we see the changes in the UK steel industry. Looks like both the blast furnace steelworks in the UK are going to convert to electric arc furnaces. So no requirement for coking coal, no requirement for iron ore. Instead, that'll be replaced by scrap metal. And then infrastructure, which is delivering engineering trains for Network Rail. That's probably about the fourth biggest commodity now in ton kilometres. As for the rest, biomass, as I said, that's reducing because we're generating more electricity now from renewable sources. Intermodal non-maritime, that's containers or swap bodies, intermodal units lifted on and off trains, and that's between origin and destination points within the country. So typically from a supermarket national distribution centre to a regional distribution centre. So, for example, from Daventry up to the central belt of Scotland, there's something like 35 trains a week of supermarket produce going up there for next day or same day delivery. So rail is now the mode of choice between the Daventry area, the Golden Triangle, and the central belt of Scotland. Other things in there, oil and petroleum was only ever a sort of marginal user of rail. It's always easier and cheaper to transport petroleum by pipeline. And as the volume of petroleum products being delivered decreases, as we move more and more to a low carbon economy, then rail is going to play a smaller and smaller part in those deliveries. So where is the market going to go? Back in 2020, Network Rail commissioned some forecasts of what the market might look like. And this graph here is showing what some forecasts for freight lifted. So these are the million tons. This is a two-stage study. So there's an initial study in 2013, which is the red line at the top here, freight market study, which was very bullish and very confident, and had a quite significant increase in tons lifted over the life of the forecast up to about 2044. The 2020 study was a bit more nuanced and looked at a number of scenarios. High growth, low growth, were there factors favourable to rail freight, factors disfavourable to rail freight. And if we look at where we actually are now in 2023, 24, we're down about here, 72, 75 million tonnes. So we're on this line here, this scenario C, which was the low growth, factors disfavourable to rail. And those factors are things like low fuel costs for heavy goods vehicles, low driver wage inflation, and less terminal development than could have been expected. So those are factors disfavourable to rail, and that's why we're now on that scenario C forecast. If the economy picks up, if there's higher growth, then we could start to see the gradient of that line increase. But there's still some way to make up the gap between what was very optimistically assumed in 2013. And this was the graph from that 2013 study, and I put it in only because it breaks the forecast down by commodity. You can see here, this black line was coal, which was forecast to drop off a cliff, and sure enough, it has done even quicker than was forecast there. These two lines here, the dark green, the light green, are the intermodal deliveries that I talked about. So ports intermodal, the dark green, that's the containers from deep sea ports. And then domestic intermodal, that's distribution within Great Britain in green. The only other commodity that was shown to grow is construction, which is this line here. And some reasons for that. The Minerals Products Association forecasts that in the next few years, a lot of smaller local quarries will become exhausted. So the aggregates industry will need to draw from bigger quarries or from sea dredged sources, and that's more favourable to rail. So there is a forecast growth in that construction sector, although that too is dependent on growth in the economy. So I talked about maritime intermodal. I'm just making a point there that some very ambitious forecasts of growth there. That is, of course, subject to geopolitical influences. An awful lot of the stuff that we buy that arrives in this country in containers comes to the Far East, principally China. And if just hypothetically there was some conflict over Taiwan, that those deliveries would drastically reduce. Who knows what's going to pan out from the conflict in the Middle East, what effects that will have on global markets, global shipping demand for deep sea containers. In fact, just recently, Maersk, one of the big intermodal container operators, has announced it's laying off, I think, 10,000 people globally because of a slackening in the market for containers. Domestic intermodal, which we talked about, moving within the UK, principally from supermarket national distribution centres, a lot of which are located in the so-called Golden Triangle in the East Midlands, around Daventry, Wellingborough, that sort of area. So going from those national distribution centres to regional distribution centres around the country. So I mentioned Scotland, but also going down into the southeast, Tilbury, down into southwest and into Wales. And there's scope for more of that. So all these deliveries that have been made, how are they being achieved? Well, this is the Network Rail's map of the strategic freight network with the core trunk routes highlighted in red, the diversionary routes and lesser secondary routes in yellow. One thing you notice about that is that it looks very much like the passenger network. And again, the freight market has changed. Much less freight now is travelling on freight-only lines, the sort of lines that serve collieries and steelworks, not being used anymore. And not surprisingly, freight is using the same lines as passenger trains, because the freight that we're delivering now is stuff that people want. So it's supermarket produce, it's Amazon deliveries, it's construction materials going into building houses and infrastructure, and all of those go to the places where people are, which are on the same routes as the as passenger trains are using. So there's now more of a conflict between passenger and freight. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Also shown on there, those boxes, those are strategic rail freight interchanges, SRFIs. That is a very particular term that is used for developments that fall within a particular planning regime. So planning applications for these big rail freight terminals are not determined by the local planning authority anymore. They're determined by the planning inspectorate, by development consent orders. So a different process for getting planning approval. The idea being that it's easier to get these sorts of developments through without getting bogged down in local politics. There is a health warning on this because this is not an up-to-date slide. So some of the rail freight terminals on there that are shown as proposed have now been built. So, for example, East Midlands Gateway here on the M1 near Derby is being constructed, already in operation very successfully. Others on there have fallen by the wayside and are not going to go ahead. So the Howbury Park in Kent is not going to go ahead. Radlett, I think, have just finally got consent to go ahead. But these strategic rail freight interchanges are key to developing some of these domestic intermodal deliveries. So the ones in the Golden Triangle, this area here in the East Midlands, Daventry, Wellingborough, that's the ideal spot for national distribution centres for the big supermarkets, because it's the sort of centre of gravity of the country, good access to the motorway network, and sort of equal travel time to the extremities of the country. And you'll notice then clusters of other terminals on the M62 corridor, central belt of Scotland, some down in the southwest. These are the regional distribution centres. So your supermarkets will have a national distribution centre. They'll then distribute to the regional distribution centres, and from there then going out to the individual stores. So that's the freight network that we're operating on. talk a little bit now about, well, why does rail freight matter? And it matters because of its potential to reduce the 3 C's. So congestion, latest figure suggests rail freight avoids something like 6.4 million road journeys a year. So that's a lot of HGVs, and HGVs have a disproportionate impact on congestion because they're slower, they don't accelerate as quickly as other road vehicles, and they can cause a lot of damage to the road network. So by having those deliveries on rail rather than road, you avoid some of the congestion that otherwise would take place on the road network, and then you reduce to an extent the pressure to build new roads with all the environmental implications that had. Just a couple of other statistics. One train potentially is the equivalent of 43 HGVs. So if you're talking about containers, you could probably get 43 containers on a train. That's 43 lorry loads. And another figure for congestion suggests that on parts of the strategic road network, congestion is 10 seconds per mile. So that's pretty significant cost. If you're trying to run a distribution business and your vehicles are clocking up 10 seconds of delay every mile, that is significant. So that's one benefit of rail freight. The next one is carbon, and there's a quote there from the William Shapps plan for rail. Rail is the only form of transport capable of moving carbon free, or a zero carbon way. And we have a real challenge with carbon in the transport industry. Transport generates something like 33% of UK carbon. And as other sectors decarbonise, that percentage, whilst the overall total may not change, but that percentage will increase. And hence the pressure on the transport sector to decarbonise. And there are some real challenges. I mean, how are you going to how are you going to decarbonise aviation, for example? And for freight, there is no realistic alternative for long distance heavy payload freight deliveries. There is no realistic alternative to rail. Battery operated trucks, you can either have heavy payload or long distance. You can't have both. The technology just isn't there. Hydrogen is very energy inefficient. There is an alternative proposal for so-called electric highway, which is electric trucks running on a sort of trolley bus system. I think there's even money to run a trial on the M180, but there's very little progress on that, and I can see that is fraught with difficulty. So rail freight is the only realistic option for decarbonising freight deliveries in the UK. And then the final benefit of rail freight then is cost, the economies of scale, the fact you can run big trains with a single driver, and if you can run them directly to destination, directly to a aggregates terminal, or directly to a port or to a distribution centre, then you cut out the road leg, and it becomes very, very cost effective. But it still is cost sensitive, and the challenge that rail freight has is that rail generally bears more of the externalities, the sort of social costs that are generated by its activities than, for example, road. So cost of congestion, cost of noise, pollution don't get added back into the costs that road hauliers bear. So you've got a skew in the market there. The market is distorted. Rail is absorbing more of those costs than road. And just an example of some of the benefits of freight, Rail Partners have done a recent report entitled Freight Expectations. And that suggests that if you treble rail freight, then by 2050, you can deliver £5.2 billion worth of economic benefit. You can reduce air quality pollutants by about 81%, and you can avoid 20 million HGV movements. That must be a year. Yes, it is. Yeah. So there's some big aspirations there in rail freight. A bit about the rail freight industry then. 5 major operators, names you'll see on the side of locomotives around the network: DB Cargo, Freightliner, GB Rail Freight, all about the same size, now. The market has changed. Those are now about the same size. Other operators, DRS, Colas, Kappa, and Rail Operations Group, and one or two other smaller ones. They're all private companies, with the exception of DRS, Direct Rail Services, which is part of the Nuclear Transport Solutions, Colin, which is part of the Nuclear Decommissioning Agency. So they are government owned ultimately, but the other operators are all private companies, albeit DB Cargo is owned by another government, just not ours. They operate in a highly competitive transport and logistics market, and that's in a market that is geared to 44-ton HGVs. And it's important not to underestimate quite how precisely the logistics have been tailored to that equipment. So pallet sizes, roll cage sizes, commodity sizes are all geared to 44-ton trucks. And road hauliers are very, very good at optimizing and making their operations very, very efficient. And they have done that, but it's all based on that equipment, which provides a challenge for rail then to try and replicate that using different equipment, different commodity sizes, vehicles constrained by loading gauge, which don't perhaps allow you to double stack pallets or stack pallets side by side. So there are some real challenges there. So it's important not to underestimate that. Also important to realise that the rail freight operators have invested significantly in the last 25 years, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment in new locomotives, thousands and thousands of new wagons. Most commodities now being delivered by rail are using new, and I say new within the last 25 year wagons. So a huge investment in wagons, some investment in terminals, though rail operators have a sort of mixed view of and success rate with terminals. Freightliner have historically operated their intermodal terminals and operated them well. Other operators have either not got into terminals or have had sort of on-off relationships with terminals. And more recently, those that have had terminals have tended to contract them out to third parties to operate. So a sort of mixed experience on terminals. And as I explained, terminals are essential to rail freight deliveries, because for most deliveries, at some point you have to take it off a rail vehicle and put it onto something else. So you need a terminal to make that interchange. So I've invested significantly and are going to have to continue investing in new locomotives. The Class 66s are life expired, so they need replacing, probably by electric locomotives. And we've seen that investment start, and I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. So recent rail freight developments in the market, more or less more of the same in the construction and intermodal sectors. Organic growth, new terminals provide new opportunities for intermodal distribution, both from the ports and domestically. So I mentioned East Midlands Gateway, which is now operated by Maritime Transport, who are marketing that quite aggressively and expanding their operations. And it's interesting to see what was a road haulier. Maritime was a road haulier, now firmly committed to and developing rail freight. And then aggregates, we're seeing continued demand for aggregate deliveries to support infrastructure projects, boosted a little bit by HS2, which I'll speak a bit more about later. And as I explained, the forecast is that some of the smaller quarries, which are mostly road served, will be exhausted, and therefore that creates more rail opportunities. And then some more interesting developments. This is the first one, a company called Varamis, operating express freight. So they're now offering daily return trips from Birmingham International to Moss End in Scotland for parcels. 4-hour timings in each direction. So that's an average speed of about 72 miles an hour. I looked on the National Rail website, and the fastest train I could see from New Street to Glasgow was 4 hours 5 minutes. So actually, these parcels are doing better than the passenger trains. They're being delivered in converted electric EMUs, so it's carbon free, 100% electric, and very very tight timing. So the cut-off to deliver to the departure stations is 30 minutes before the departure of the train. So you get your roll cage to Birmingham International 30 minutes before the train departs. It's on the train and it's going to Glasgow. And then it picked up probably within 30 minutes of the train arriving at the other end. So offering a real added value service there for the parcels industry. At an average speed of 72 miles an hour, you could not beat that by road. You probably wouldn't beat it by plane if you added in the handling. So that's interesting. And Varamis has aspirations to expand the network further than that. So we'll see what happens there. HS2. So lots of opportunities for rail freight in HS2. A lot of aggregate being delivered by rail. A lot of the tunnelling spoil will be dispatched by rail. So there's a big facility at Willesden Euro Terminal, which will take all the tunnelling spoil from the London tunnels, the tunnel into Euston, the tunnel out towards West Ruislip. Something like 6 million tonnes of spoil, and that's going to various landfill or reclamation sites, Cliff in the Thames Estuary, Rugby, Barrington, which is an old cement works chalk pit near Cambridge. Not going as quite as fast as planned because of delays to the programme, but the facility there is being operated very efficiently. The other delivery I've shown there is tunnel lining segments. So these currently being manufactured in Thamesport on the Thames Estuary and being delivered to West Ruislip for the western end of the Norfolk tunnels. The eastern end is a different tunnelling contract, and those are being manufactured in Hartlepool, and they'll start being delivered to Willesden very shortly. At each of those tunnel lining segments, 6 or 7 tonnes a segment, 6 or 7 segments per ring. So and a ring is 1.8 metres long. So for a 20-odd kilometre tunnel, you need lots and lots of rings and lots of segments. So these trains are running one train a day. And just another example there. This is a technology widely used on the continent, delivering semi-trailers by road, piggyback by rail, but piggyback operation. You drive your semi-trailer to a rail terminal, lift it onto a rail vehicle, and then trunk it across the continent. And this company, TX Logistics, has a network throughout mainland Europe, and the proposal is to extend that to run to Barking. So you've got a train running from Cologne to Barking, delivering these semi-trailers into the UK. Why Barking? Because the trains can use HS1, which is built to a European gauge, so you can use European pocket wagons to deliver to Barking. Can't go any further than Barking, but get them to Barking and then you can put them on the road for local distribution. It started in the summer, ran for a couple of months operationally very successfully. Struggles commercially because lack of an eastbound load. So plenty of loads, imported loads, westbound, but it struggles as most international rail freight services have struggled in finding the backloads to go eastbound. There's a significant imbalance in trade, so that means there's very few eastbound loads, and therefore the prices that forwarders are prepared to pay for eastbound loads are very, very low, because the road hauliers are cutting their throats to deliver them. So it's not dead. They're looking at how they can make it stack up commercially, but the interesting thing is that operationally it was successful. So this is the bit where you come in then. So progress on network capability. So in my 2019 talk, I went through about 6 capabilities that I said that the rail freight network ought to have in order to make it fit for freight. And so the question is, have we delivered on those capabilities? Have we delivered for freight? The first 3 things I've added in, which weren't there before for various reasons. And the first one is diversity, and I've realised, yeah, diversity, right. Industry structure, electric haulage, and looking back in it now, I'm not sure why I didn't have electric haulage in last time, but I didn't. Longer trains, heavier trains, faster, bigger, more access to the network, more capacity. So if we look about diversity, a couple of quotes there. I don't think we have made enough progress, so we need to do something different. If we carry on doing what we've done up to now, then nothing's going to change. And that doesn't mean that we need, or I'm not saying that we need better people in the rail freight industry or better people in the engineering industry. I think we need different people with different skills, different approaches, able to work more collaboratively to provide solutions for some of the challenges that we face. And there are a lot of challenges. There's decarbonisation, skill shortages. We need to drive modal shift. All of these are going to need innovative and agile solutions. So we need greater diversity of ideas. And to get a diversity of ideas, you need diversity of people, and to provide that innovation to solve those challenges. And to go back to what I said right in the beginning with the biscuit analogy, we need to be very focused on customer, focused on delivery. Okay, focus on the end, not the means. Got to focus on the end. Remembering that infrastructure and freight are only enablers. Industry structure, right? So it's clear that the industry needs to change. The structure that was put in place 25 years ago is no longer right, or no longer delivering for the country, for the industry. It's too expensive, it's too cumbersome, and there's not the incentive to make things happen. So the government commissioned Kenneth Williams to do a review, which then became the Williams-Schaap Plan for Rail in 2021. And the solution to everything apparently was to create Great British Railways as a guiding mind. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit cynical, it's because I am. And I'm sure there's a lot going on, but there's not a lot of visible progress. And it's selected Derby as its headquarters. It seems to have spent eye-wateringly large sums of money. However, I understand that there was mention in the King's speech today of draft legislation to create it. Now, I don't know the details. I don't know what's going to come out of that, but we certainly need change. We need strong leadership to drive that change and to meet all those challenges that I talked about. And for freight, we need that leadership to provide the context and the confidence in which private sector operators are confident that they can invest and generate a return, because history has shown that they will invest, but only if the climate and the environment is right and that they can make the financial case. Things are more complicated than they were 25 years ago because transport is a devolved issue. So now you have the Scottish government defining transport requirements in Scotland, the Welsh government the same, and also some of the subnational transport bodies. So TfL, Transport for London, have been doing it for a long time. Merseyside Transport is starting to run its own services, and I suspect some of the other big mayoral authorities will want to get in on the act and start running trains. So somehow this guiding mind needs to be able to pull all those potentially conflicting desires and requirements together and provide the leadership and the drive that the industry needs. There has been talk of vertical integration. This is where you, perhaps on a line of route basis, you have one organisation that is responsible for running the trains and maintaining the infrastructure. And those of us in the room with long memories will think, well, that's more or less like it was in sectorisation, where intercity ran some of the routes, Provincial ran others, Freight ran others again. The thing we need to be aware of was that back then in BR days, you had a strong chairman who was prepared to bang heads together if people started doing or acting uncompetitively. And if we come up with an industry structure that incorporates vertical integration, there needs to be some checks and balances to ensure that a passenger operator, for example, responsible for infrastructure on a route, doesn't progress that at the expense of either other passenger operators or freight operators. So I don't have a solution to that, but that is something that needs some very careful design to make sure that we don't get any perverse incentives or unintended consequences. Freight, by and large, operates nationally, across routes, across network rail routes, across network rail regions, and some form of national timetabling facility is going to be essential in whatever format this new industry structure takes. Again, we cannot allow a situation where timetabling is done by route, and you then end up with freight trains crossing from one route to another, and the timetables don't match up, and you end up waiting and building in delay. So timetabling has to be done nationally. I would make a bit at this stage to say that because of the national nature of freight, you should put freight on the graph first, and then add on the passenger trains. I'll just throw that out there. And the same goes for possession planning. There needs to be a national view taken of possession planning, so you don't end up with possessions on parallel routes at the same time. There was one infamous occasion where over an Easter, I think it was, all the intermodal terminals in the central belt of Scotland were cut off by rail. So, or were going to be. Eventually, it was sorted out. But that's even just with one infrastructure organisation planning it. So there needs to be some real coordination and discipline there to make sure that there are alternative diversionary routes available. And then the other thing that's now been incorporated into the ORR's determination for the next control period is freight growth targets. There's been a growth target in Scotland for the last 5 years, which has delivered growth of something like 7.5%, organic growth, more cross-border deliveries, Highland Spring bottled water now being delivered by rail from Blackfoot to the Central Belt and down into the Golden Triangle. So for the next control period, there'll be a target of 8.7% growth in Scotland, 7.5% growth in England and Wales. So just to reiterate on industry structure, it may all be very, very difficult, but the structure has to provide a framework within which the private freight operators can invest. And that's going to be absolutely key. Electrification. So I was surprised I didn't put that in the previous presentation. More mainline electrification. Electric hauled freight faster, can deliver heavier trains, it's quieter, acceleration is quicker, it's more reliable because there's fewer moving parts, and it's cheaper. So why wouldn't you do it? The UK is committed to net zero by 2050, and as I said, rail freight is the only realistic solution for decarbonising freight deliveries. So how are we doing? Well, that's a clear graph. That's a graph of electrified routes in bold and roughly 38% of the network is electrified, the total electrified. And in fact, 95% of freight route runs over a core network of about 2,000 miles, of which 2/3 is electrified. So you might think, well, we could be running a lot quite a lot of electrically hauled freight, but we're not. And one of the reasons is there are a number of missing links. So that's a few miles at the end or beginning of a journey, or in the middle, where there isn't where the rail isn't electrified, and operationally then becomes easier to haul it diesel throughout rather than change locomotives. So some examples. There's about 1.5 miles of track leading from Thames Gateway to the London Tilbury and Southend route. Could be electrified very cheaply and quickly. That would allow trains from Gateway to a number of destinations then to be electrically hauled throughout. Locally to here, the section from Hare Park to Sturton would allow electric hauled trains into the Freightliner container terminal. And so work that was done by the CLT suggested that 60 miles of electrification, costing roughly 100 million, would take 2 million train miles per annum from being diesel hauled to electric hauled, generating some real benefit there. And then go on from there to electrify the other third of the core network that's not currently electrified. So remains the Midland Main Line, northeast, southwest, Felixstowe to Midlands and the north, and the Transpennine routes. And that then would enable about 95% of freight deliveries, current freight deliveries, to be electrically hauled. I did talk about cost. There have been some fairly eye-watering costs of some recent schemes, up to £2.5 million per single track kilometre. And that's excluding any costs for rebuilding bridges or redoing signalling. That's just the electrical wiring gubbins. By contrast, Switzerland, it's about £500,000 per single track kilometre. So there's a bit of a gap there that there ought to be closed. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Treasury has gone cool on electrification, just because of the cost. So, but there is work going on, and if Peter was here, he'd be able to probably talk about that. If we run more electric trains, we need more locomotives. There are plans in the pipeline for new electric locomotives. Road Operations Group has ordered Class 93s, those are the green locos at the top. These are tri-mode locomotives, so overhead, battery and diesel locomotives, diesel engines for the last mile. GB Rail Freight, those are bi-mode, overhead and diesel. And then what do you do about the sidings? Because it's not always possible to electrify into sidings. Couple of solutions. This is something that's been trialled at Wellingborough. Movable overhead catenary system, which does exactly what it says on the can. You can move the catenary, which is a solid bar, out of the way, which allows access into the top of the wagons, either to grab out bulk material or to lift on and off containers. And there's also a wide variety of bimodal locomotives and electrical shunt locomotives. And I see recently someone has even created a battery version of a Class 8 shunter. Why, I don't know. But conscious of time, we want longer trains, because longer trains is more payload per unit train, and therefore economies of scale. And in order to run longer trains, we need longer loops, longer yards, and there has been some progress on that. New loop at Buxton to support aggregates deliveries. Hope Valley upgrade is delivering longer loops. Redbridge loop in Southampton has allowed longer container trains. So some progress there. And the operators have been doing various things as well. So been running 4,000 tons jumbo trains out of the Mendips into West London for many years, but have extended that concept to trains out of the Peak District. And DB has been experimenting with longer trains between Scunthorpe and Lackenby and other routes. And then some research by the RSSB looking at coupling strengths revealed that actually there have been some very cautious interpretations of coupling strength data, and reviewing that has allowed about 15% increase in train load on some deliveries, some routes. So there's some progress there. Faster trains. We had a very eloquent presentation from Gareth a couple of months ago about line speed, and he said it's not line speed that matters, it's journey time, and largely I would agree. Why does that matter for freight? Well, it matters if you're delivering parcels. It matters if you're delivering supermarket produce and it needs to be on the shelf at 7 o'clock the next morning when the doors open. Does it matter for a ton of aggregates whether it's delivered fast? Possibly not. Where it does matter, though, to the operator is in utilisation of assets. So if you look at the costs of rail freight, track access is distance dependent, but almost everything else, labour costs, equipment costs, even fuel costs to a degree, are time based. So if you can speed up the journey time, reduce the time that you are committing your assets to any one journey, then you reduce your cost. And if you can reduce cycle times, and rail freight tends to work on cycles of equipment, how long it takes to load a train, deliver it, unload it, and return it to the loading point. If, for example, you can save enough time, so instead of it being a 25-hour cycle time, it becomes 23-hour cycle time, suddenly instead of needing 2 sets of wagons to deliver a daily service, you need 1 set. You've made a massive improvement in asset utilisation. So speed does matter. This is some information I got from Network Rail, and I don't understand it completely, because that suggests that actual train velocity is somewhere between 35 miles per hour for class 6 trains, so that's trains running up to 60 miles an hour, 48 miles an hour for class 4 trains, trains running up to 75 miles an hour. I'm not sure the rest of the figures back that up, so I think there's probably a range there of somewhere between 30 and 48 for average speed of freight trains. But if you think even 48 for a train that's capable of 75 miles an hour, it's not that brilliant. So definitely some opportunities to improve there, and a lot of that is down to operators challenging the piles and the timings that they get. I'm conscious of time. Do I need to finish by 6:30? Heavy axles, I think a plea there to engineers that we need to remove speed restrictions over particular structures for heavy axles. So to go anywhere, axle load is 22.5 tons, but some bulk commodities, particularly construction, run at 25.5 tons. And on a number of structures, in fact, probably quite a lot of structures, in order to run those axle weights, there's a speed restriction implied, and that then slows the train down. You don't have to accelerate after the restriction, which takes time. It's noisy, it consumes more fuel. So get rid of those restrictions so that we can run 25.5 ton axles at line speed, please. Bigger trains, this is all about gauging and containers. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the UK structure gauge with a rounded top, but containers, of course, don't have rounded tops. They have square tops, they have square bottoms as well. So the requirement for the rail freight industry is to be able to deliver 9'6" high deep sea containers, 9'6" high pallet wide swap bodies on a standard platform height wagon, 1050 millimeters, something like that. And to do that, you need the W12 gauge. Often electrification schemes deliver gauge clearance by default, but the electrical engineers have been getting very clever and doing things like current arrested and things that means they can reduce clearances, so we don't always get those benefits. More access, so freight is 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation now, so freight requires access to the network 24/7. and understands that there need to be maintenance and engineering works on routes. But if that happens, then there needs to be an alternative route with the same capability. It's no use saying we've got an alternative route, but by the way, you can't carry your 9.6 containers on that route because it's not gauge cleared. That's not adequate capability. And it's interesting and pleasing to see that on some recent schemes, particularly Trans-Pennine Upgrade, there has been some thought about providing alternative capacity to allow work on the main route. Capacity, more capacity. That's a little bit out of date, but that's a route of daily freight trains. So that's a number of trains, some of both directions across the country. And there are not huge numbers, even on this section of the West Coast Main Line here, more of which later. It's only 60 to 80 trains a day. So that's 1 or 2 trains an hour in each direction. So it's not huge. So how are we going to cope with all this modal shift that we talked about, decarbonising the freight industry? Again, some more work done by the CALT, looked at HGV journeys and which ones were addressable by rail, suggested that 38% of the total HGV ton kilometres could be converted to rail. And on most routes, that works out at an additional 1 or 2 trains per hour. So not massive increase. West Coast Main Line is different, 3 to 4 trains an hour required there, but most of the network, it's 1 to 2 trains an hour. And again, there's been some progress on capacity. So Hope Valley, Trans-Pennine Upgrade, Warrington Dive Under, East-West Rail, which interestingly will allow access from Southampton into that Golden Triangle. And then there's HS2, which was going to be the answer to the Maiden's Prayer. And it was always about capacity, wasn't it? I think the argument was we need more capacity. If we build a new railway, we can take trains off the existing railway. If we build the new railway as a high-speed railway, we can run more trains on it and take more trains off the existing railway, which was always good as far as it went, but now it doesn't. So we've got a real challenge. Network Rail a few months ago produced a paper, West Coast Main Line South Strategic Advice, which listed out quite a suite of interventions required to address some of the demand on the southern section of the West Coast Main Line, assuming HS2 was going to go ahead. And now it's not going to go ahead. The additional capacity will not be created on the West Coast Main Line, so there's a real challenge there to be solved. And I don't know what the answer is there. But I mean, we were promised all sorts of things were going to be delivered with the money that's going to be saved on HS2, so who knows? So some conclusions then. Rail, the only realistic means of decarbonising freight. The capabilities I've described, albeit rather briefly, they're all proven technologies. We don't have to develop anything new. It's all stuff we've done before or we know how to do. Stage approach will deliver early benefits. So I talked about electrification. Those no regret schemes at 60 miles of electrification would quickly deliver benefits. And focus on the customer. So thank you very much. Questions?
Surely what has happened with HS2 has torpedoed a lot of the future. You know, HS2 was thought out, not as Rishi seems to think that it's just somebody's glorious idea. But you're going to have real problems north of Birmingham if you don't have a new railway. So a lot of your plans really have fallen on the floor. What is the solution? Yeah. But it's absolutely disgraceful. And, I don't think you could have fired a greater rocket at the railways if you'd tried.
No, I tend to agree with you, Roger. And the thing is, it's put us back probably 15 years because for 15 years or so, the solution has been HS2 and the capacity that is going to be released. So plans have been and strategies have been developed on that basis. And now all of that is wiped away. I mean, the original rationale for building a new route was because trying to upgrade existing routes would be too disruptive. And I think the spectre of West Coast upgrade back in the 2000s was convinced people that building a new route was better. But having started down that route to then this very late stage to say, well, actually, we're not going to do that. Yeah, as you say, it's pulled them right from underneath the industry's feet.
But won't it make a lot of companies sit back and think, what are we putting our money into?
Absolutely, it's all
chances of it working are less.
It's all about confidence, and people who are making investment decisions are going to look at the market, look at the political and economic environment, and make their judgments accordingly. Not good, no. And I don't have an answer. I don't have a solution.
What about fuel, road haulage fuel? With fuel tax being frozen for 11 years, is it now? The cost of road haulage hasn't gone up like it should have done.
No.
And more heavy lorries are causing more and more damage. And the department are getting very worried that they've got some bridges over 40 years old. And we're going to have to think about strengthening some of these. I feel really sorry for them. But that must be a significant thing. How does the rest of Europe compare? Do you know?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how the rest of Europe compares on fuel prices, but the rest of Europe has a sort of more enlightened approach to road haulage, and it's far more regulated than it is in this country. I think to a certain degree, I think the rail freight industry has been sort of sitting back and thinking, well, it'll all get sorted out because the diesel powered trucks have got a finite life, and it'll all come out in the wash. But you're right, the lower than inflation increases in fuel duty are one of those factors disfavourable to rail freight in those forecasts I show that MDS Transmodal did for Network Rail. So and that's reflected in the tonnages that we're seeing lifted now, because they're at the bottom end of those forecasts. If fuel duty was increased, then that tips the balance more in favour of rail.
Some interesting chat online between those that were obviously listening to you at the same time, but around how the changing electricity prices has affected the use of electric haulage.
Yes,
in the short term.
Yeah.
I guess just some speculation around whether that is a long-term challenge or just a short-term blip, I guess.
I think that's a short-term blip, and the information I've seen about that is that passenger operators tend to buy electricity in advance and hedge electricity purchases via Network Rail. The freight operators didn't do that. So the freight operators were paying the spot electric price, whereas the passenger operators were paying the hedged.
But these electricity charges are frozen at pre-Russian invasion level.
In Germany?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, they're not paying the current market.
No.
And that had to go to Brussels for approval because it was anti-competitive.
Yes.
Anyway, the Brussels Parliament approved it and suggested that other countries adopted a similar attitude. But they may be paying 20% less for their electricity than
Yeah.
would otherwise be.
Yeah. But we have a laissez-faire approach to these things in this country, don't we?
Good questions. Tim.
On the first maps you put up, was of the country with the various freight networks on.
Yes.
It was very interesting that those freight networks didn't go into Wales. They didn't go down the southwest at all. And you've said, right, Daventry to the central belt in Scotland, great success. I would have thought Daventry to Plymouth would be equally a good thing, but
Well, Daventry to Bristol is running now, I think, and into South Wales. Yes, that's something, that's an area that is ripe for development and growth. And it's those sorts of long distance HGV deliveries that can be readily converted to rail, but you do need the facilities at the other end to unload the trains.
yes, and Bristol is still miles away from the southwest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cornwall is.
Yes. You want to get at least as far as Plymouth, as you say.
Yes.
But yes, there is more to do, without doubt.
I've got a team currently working on Northallerton Eaglescliffe gauge clearance, resolving the challenge around Yarm Tunnel. So I guess there's still some pockets of largely third party as well as government investment in solving those sections that prevent access to ports in particular.
I've currently got a proposal in to Network Rail to double the mileage of W12, to double the mileage of W10, to double the mileage of W9 for free.
Feels like a good talk for a future.
It does, yes.
Future
Yes,
doesn't it?
Yeah, when you've done that, Tim, come along and give us a talk. Yeah. Yes, Peter.
You explained, Chris, how the market share of DB cargoes dropped and Freightliner and GB have grown.
Yes.
And presumably, I think I'm right in saying that the achievable profit margin on intermodal traffic is much less than traditional heavy freight traffic. So do you see scope for consolidation among hauliers in the next few years?
Scope, yes. I suspect it would be challenging for any of those three companies you just named to merge, because that would then create a dominant player. There might be scope for any of those three to acquire some of the smaller companies, but as you say, the profit margin not brilliant. So I think the current strategy of rail freight companies is to just concentrate on what they're currently doing and try to make that as efficient and profitable, or least loss-making as they can.
Because it struck me that the current market structure of freight operators is very much to the benefit of end customers, because it is a competitive market.
Yeah.
But you have to question, and obviously people have been investing over the years, but how reinvestable some of these businesses actually are, given the sort of thin profits they're making.
I think certain sectors are not reinvestable. I think the steel sector probably is one that is not. If you look at some of the equipment that is being used and the age of that equipment, and the problems that are now being incurred with that equipment, would suggest that it's not reinvestable. So, where investment has taken place, it's been generally in equipment that is sort of multi-user, not dedicated to any one customer or any one operator. So box wagons, intermodal wagons, some hopper wagons, mostly where the money has been, and because they can be moved around between customers. But you don't make any money in rail freight unless you've got property you can sell.
Last question. Yeah.
Also,
Okay. Big question.
Quickly, Chris.
Yeah.
The Scottish government's growth target for
Yes.
rail freight.
Yes.
According to Ireland, are those ton or ton mile targets?
Ton miles.
I know previously, I think in the presentation I explained that I think the Scotland, the profit is more than the England's target for freight line. Am I correct?
Yes.
So I know it's a small network of a Scotland, and in the England network is quite big, but is there anything the government is putting pressure for the companies like Tesco or Aldi, whatever, in using the lorries to transport? Is there anything they're putting pressure that you need to, for the certain distance, you need to use the freight line, freight lines or anything to increase the target?
Not direct pressure. What the major difference between Scotland, Wales and England is in Scotland and Wales, they have what's called a freight facilities grant. So there are grants available towards the cost of building of infrastructure or purchasing equipment. And justification for that is modal shift from road to rail generates a benefit in terms of reduced noise, reduced
congestion, carbon
Congestion.
impact.
basic congestion. Yes, it's based on it. Yeah. And so the government is in effect buying that benefit of reduced congestion by making a grant towards capital costs. And that they used to have that system in England, haven't done for probably 10 years. It isn't in Scotland, it is in Wales. And I mean, in Scotland, for example, the Highland Spring loading facility at Blackpool was funded by a freight facilities grant. So if the investment is there and the support is there, then that will enable modal shift. So that's probably one of the bigger things that this government could do in England is reinstate a freight facilities grant to start grabbing back some of that environmental benefit.
Excellent, thank you. Any final comments from those online?
It's a lot of engagement actually. There's quite a few conversations happening in the chat, responding to each other. Steve Valentine's asking, there seems to be a little point in electrifying those missing links if the operating costs or access costs and electric locos prevents them being used. Is it Freightliner who have just stood down all their electric fleet in favour of cheaper and diesels? I have a similar question in the same vein, if in the same sort of direction. If all of the rolling stock is roughly 25 years old or less than, when can we anticipate newer rolling stock that are electric capable and take use of these sort of reduced carbon benefits?
Okay, so there's a question about costs of electric versus diesel. I think that is a short-term effect. Freightliner stabling their electric locomotives and reverting to diesel. That's very much short-term, generated by a spike in electric costs. So I would see that being reversed fairly soon. And perhaps there needs to be something within the structure of the industry that provides incentive to use electric, or some economies of scale on using electric. As far as rolling stock, my comments about 25 years old was related to wagons. Locomotives, similar sort of age, the Class 66s started to be delivered about 1997, so 25, 30 years old. I think within the next 10 years, we'll see a more significant programme of electric locomotive procurement. So I showed the two examples there of ROG, who I think have ordered 10 and got an option for another 20. GB Rail Freight, I think, have ordered 30. So that's a start. And I think once there is some confidence that those types are reliable, then we'll see more of them being purchased.
Also saying that the bigger challenge seems to be having enough power supply in the wires rather than just the actual fact that we're there in the first place?
Yes, without doubt. Capacity on the rail network is also capacity in the distribution network.
Hold that thought for the talk that Richard Olivenshaw is delivering in March around static frequency converter installation at Hambleton. So that'll tell us more around how we move forward on power supply.
We've also got a few more questions around the rolling stock. Seatail's asking any scope for the UK to utilise the continental modal law or similar systems. And Leo also follows that up with does the industry have the low loaders to facilitate those? FAA or FKA.
So second question first, yes, there are various low platform wagons. But like most things in life, you don't get anything for free. So low platform wagons generally have a smaller diameter wheel and therefore have a lower payload. So that restricts the weight of the containers that you can deliver. And so low platform wagons are a way of delivering 9'6" containers or pallet wide containers on routes that are not cleared to W10 or W12. But that's introducing another variant, another piece of equipment into the equation, and the economies of scale dictate that you want one piece of equipment that can go anywhere. Just as with a road vehicle, you have a skeletal trailer, and that can go anywhere. You don't have to have a low height skeletal trailer because you're going to Felixstowe this week, and then it doesn't fit under the bridge. So it's that sort of avoiding the operational complications and additional costs that comes of having to have dedicated equipment. We need to use this on this delivery because we're going here, and you then lose all your flexibility. So the other question was about the modal law. Is that the swing? I think that's probably the swing wagon. Right. Okay. There is a I think it's modal law that has a wagon for carrying semi-trailers, so like the ones I showed with the TX Logistics solution, where the body of the wagon swings out to one side so you can reverse the trailer on rather than lifting it on. But I don't know enough about that to know how that would look from a gauging point of view, but I suspect probably fairly challenging. Anything below sole bar level is challenging. It's not just the top corners, it's the bottom corners as well, I think, Tim, isn't it?
Same reason why you've only got as far as Barking.
Yeah.
Because there are platforms at Barking and the platforms at Dagenham.
Yeah.
And that stops it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one last from Thomas Bennett from Structures. Fascinating presentation, especially the use of lower RA/higher speed BMUs converted to freight operation. Do you see this expanding onto other lines or routes in the immediate future, or are they lacking in significant infrastructure required at each end for loading such?
So this is the parcels operations talking. Yes. Well, of course, Royal Mail has been delivering mail by rail for many years, using electric multiple units from Wembley going up to initially there was quite a network. Now it's up to Glasgow, I think on both the west coast and east coast routes, also to Newcastle. So yes, the technology is proven, largely for moving parcels. You just need a platform. You may need a ramp to bridge between the wagon or the carriage floor and the platform. But really you require no more than that because everything is wheeled. It's all in roll cages. So there have been trials of parcels at various of the London termini. I think at St Pancras and at Euston. So in that respect, just replicating what was done many years ago with brutes and parcels and newspaper traffic. It was all done in passenger stations. Whether the industry structure will allow you to do that, whether the station operators are prepared to allow freight operators into service parcels and mail trains is another question. But it's all doable. Physically, it's all doable.
Still a platform outside of Doncaster.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
stuff. Excellent.
Yeah, a lot,
Good-
thanks.
Good questions. So if we're gonna, so just to summarise a couple of key stats that I'm taking away. 60 miles of electrification makes a massive difference. International containers and construction represent over 50% of the current market. I think is really useful to remember, and also just recognising that the type of freight we're now moving has a fundamentally different requirement in terms of mixed use railways compared to the railway of even 5 years ago, when we had far more dedicated heavy freight lines, particularly in and around this part of the world. So, Chris, thank you very much for a really insightful presentation. If we could thank you in the usual way, that'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. For those that are interested, as I said, we've got meetings taking shape for the first Tuesday of every other month. So looking at February, April and June, but with the caveat that we've moved the Easter one a week earlier, just to confuse everyone and avoid Easter. Meeting in York next Thursday around track worker safety. We're also getting PWI visits up and running again as well. So we've got a visit in the diary for the 14th of March next year, which will be limited in numbers for people that want to go and look around Network Rail's Holgate facility. We're going to have a guided tour around there. So lots of stuff happening. And thank you very much. Have a safe journey home. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a short question, Chris?
Mhm.
What's wrong with channel tunnel freight? When, you know, there's less freight comes through the tunnel than used to come across on the train ferry.
Well, yes. I mean, a lot of it is